Andrew Dismore studied law in the University of Warwick and the London School of Economics. Anyone who doesn't know the London School of Economics, of course, of him, we are in one of his buildings.
Hello.
You coming in? Yes.
Hi.
You know each other, of course.
Yes, of course. How are you?
And he worked as solicitor, specializing in helping victims of accidents and crime. He entered Parliament as Labour MP for Hendon in 1997. He has served in a number of parliamentary committees, including the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which he chairs, and the Standards and Privileges Committee. He is also involved in various political organizations, including Friends of Cyprus. His long-standing interest in the situation in Cyprus and his other interests are expressed in a number of speeches and articles which can be found in his website. By the way, anyone who would like to look into his website is Andrew Dismore MP.com. Very simple. Andrew Dismore MP.com.
The Cyprus section.
There is a Cyprus.
Well, there must be, as I thought.
Or Greek and Cyprus.
Yes. As Vice Chair of Friends of Cyprus, he has paid repeated visits to the island, where he met with Greek and Turkish Cypriot politicians, academics, business people, and civil society personalities. Following his last visit there, Cyprus, from the 26th November to the 2nd of December 2008, he put down many parliamentary questions, 45 if I remember well.
50 actually.
50, yes, but here you are.
45 to the Foreign Office and the rest were to the department.
Which, when they were answered, were fed into an adjournment debate on Cyprus on the 15th of January 2009, in which the Minister for Europe, Flint, MP, responded on behalf of the British government. Well, the only thing I wanted to add is that I don't know any other MP, and most certainly I don't know any other political personality or journalist who has so many contacts, not only in Cyprus, but also in Turkey and Greece. I remember well, about 2 or 3 years ago, you paid 1 or 2 visits to Turkey as well. So, we haven't been blessed with the weather, but we are blessed with our speaker. Andrew, the field is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Kyriacos. And what I propose to do is probably speak for about 20 minutes or so, and then we can have a discussion about what I've got to say, and those who disagree with me will no doubt make their views known. I think the starting point, when we're looking at where we are now, is a year ago when, in the Republic elections, President Christofias of Cal was elected. And that probably came as a surprise to many people, as people thought that the former president was going to be a shoo-in. But I think it's quite significant that although President Christofias won and President Papadopoulos was eliminated in the first round, effectively we had 2/3 of Greek Cypriots voting for a pro-solution candidate, in either Mr Christofias or Mr Kassididis, who was the runner-up. And I think that's created quite an interesting climate now, at least in theory, because for the first time we've got leadership on both sides of the Green Line who are committed to finding a solution, with Mr Talat in the north and Mr Christofias in the south. And of course they both have a long personal relationship, as do their political parties have a long relationship going back long before 1974. Just to run through the most recent history, on the 21st of March, Mr Christofias launched a new initiative suggesting preparatory phases through opening the new dialogue. On the 25th of July, it was decided that that would move into fully fledged negotiations, which began on the 3rd of September. And the leaders since then have been meeting on a virtually weekly basis. And this year they've been meeting on the same, pretty well the same frequency. The atmosphere has had its ups and downs, but has been described by Mr. Kyriacos very positively as not bad. So I presume that's a positive sign. The issues they're working through have been divided into 6 chapters: governance and power sharing, property, the European Union, the economy, territory and security. And each of those, with the assistance of the UN, is being subdivided into 3 what they call baskets. Issues that are agreed, issues that are close to agreement, with the detail to be sorted out by the 2 negotiators for each side, Ozdil Nami for the Turkish Cypriots and George Strikogu, our former High Commissioner here for the Greek Cypriots, and the 3rd batch, the issues that cannot be agreed as yet. Unfortunately, there seem to be far too many in the latter 2 baskets, in particular the latter basket, than the former basket. But at the beginning of January, the first section, governance and power sharing, was completed so far as they can, and they've now moved on to property issues, which I think will be a real test, because that is one of the most difficult and thorny issues to be resolved, and we'll see how they get on. But progress overall remains slow. Mr. Kyriacos has said beginning of January, despite our intensive efforts after 4 months' work, I don't have real progress to report. A number of secondary issues have been agreed, but there remain, however, significant differences of approach, and statements by both leaders since then, and indeed before then, have been in a similar vein. But nevertheless, both leaders have expressed confidence that a result can be achieved. And on the one hand, there's a positive that there are no artificial deadlines to the process, and neither side is clearly going to walk out of the talks, because that would be a complete disaster for whichever side were to do that. But equally, there doesn't seem much of a meeting of minds on the final end game, as it were, and there's no real breakthrough. And with no, at least, deadline to work towards, there's no real time pressure either, other than the pressure that the lack of a solution itself creates. I think we should look at the role of the UN, and we met the Special Representative Tai Brooke-Zerihu, who I find very impressive. And I think, generally speaking, the UN people in the island over the years have been quite impressive. We met him twice, actually, once formally in the UN headquarters, and secondly in the departure lounge at Larnaca Airport, because he was about to get on the same plane as we were, going to London. And his view is that he was paid to be optimistic, which is a positive way of looking at it. And of course we have the UN Secretary General Special Advisor, the former Australian Foreign Secretary, Alexander Downer. The approach that the UN are adopting is different to previous approaches. They're trying to work towards a framework agreement, not detailed like Annan 5 was, trying to dot every I and cross every T, but to try and build trust and confidence as they go on, creating the general structure with the detail to be worked out later. What Downer said again last month, there is momentum, he's cautiously optimistic, it's not a process that will be owned by the UN or the international community, the solution should be put to the people, not one that's drawn up by foreigners. And I think that shows a difference of approach between somebody who was, in Alexander Downer, an elected politician himself, who can understand the pressures on elected politicians and the fact that you need to have an outcome that is acceptable to both communities in a referendum. And that sort of approach, I think, can be contrasted to previous UN representatives who have been UN bureaucrats. I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but have had perhaps a civil servant type approach. And we also, I suppose, saw that in big time with our former special representative from the UK, who shall be nameless. Now we have, I think, a politician who understands the pressures on politicians, and I think that is a positive sign. And I also think it's positive that he's not spending his whole life in Cyprus. He's coming in and he's going as and when he thinks he can do something to help move things along. So what I think we've now got is a process that is more political and less legalistic. The legalistic systems approach clearly hasn't worked in the past, and now we see a more political approach. But we do get hung up still on legalistic interpretation of words, and the best example of that is federation and confederation. What does that mean? Well, it can mean anything to anybody, really. Obviously, the Greek Cypriot side says, well, federation is what we agreed as part of the framework back in the 1970s, and that was a major concession on their part, and you can see it that way. Mr. Tellet says he's never actually used the word confederation. That's been implied in what he said. And really, I think that we need to get away from sterile arguments about what is a federation and what isn't as a confederation, and actually look at what is being proposed. Because neither of those words means very much in itself. What is actually important is where on a sliding scale the different responsibilities of the two constituent states lie. Because you can have a federation which is very loose, and some would see as a confederation. You can have a confederation which is very tight, and others would see as a federation. Really, we should get away from these words and look at what the actual structure that's being proposed, the division of powers between the central state and the constituent parties, where that balance is placed, and not get too hung up on the words, because they don't mean a great deal themselves. If you look at them in a dictionary, you won't see a great deal of difference between them. As always, I think the key to progress can be found in Ankara, and there are significant developments. Turkey is now a member of the UN Security Council, and in June will hold the presidency of the Security Council, and that will create real challenges for Turkey. Turkey will be scrutinised more closely as a Security Council member, and will need to be part of the general consensus of the Security Council, which tries to work on consensus, not confrontation. Though you may be somewhat questioning of that statement. I think that is actually true in broad terms, except when things are really, really difficult. Cyprus is a recognised member of the United Nations, and Turkey, whether they like it or not, will have to discuss with Cyprus, as Cyprus has its UN permanent representative, issues of relevance that arise in the Security Council. That comes with the presidency, and I think that's a challenge that Turkey will have to address somehow. How Turkey will be able to deal with that without formally recognising Cyprus itself, and how the presidency of the UN, of which Cyprus is a member, is a dichotomy that Turkey will have to address. And it's been one of the real threats. It's been a problem that's faced Turkey all the way through, the issue of recognition of Cyprus, and equally from the Republic's point of view, the hoops that it jumps through over the issues of recognition of the North and the problems that that creates. Turkey and the EU, well, we've got the review of the accession process and progress this year. Turkey has not implemented the Ankara Protocol at all. Ali Arel said to us, he's the chair of the Cyprus EU Association and former president of the Turkish Cypriot Chamber of Commerce, Turkey is being spoilt by the EU. And I think that Turkey's traditional approach towards the EU has been one of brinkmanship. It tries to drive as hard a bargain as it can right up to the wire of the final decisions. But I think unless we start to see progress in the summer, and when the papers start to be written for the Council of Ministers, which will be making the decisions in the autumn, and as we start to see some progress, I think it will be very difficult to continue to play that brinkmanship game. And we've also seen some difficult actions by the Turkish military, or I should say navy. It was the harassment of the Republic survey ships operating in the Cypriot exclusive economic zone. I know that Turkey doesn't recognise that, but the rest of the world does, in accordance with the law of the sea, and surprise, surprise, even the UK, who has been quite supportive of the Turkish process, was quite critical of Turkey's approach. And also there have been worrying signs in relation to Turkey and Greece, and you know that relationship is incredibly important, not just for Cyprus but more generally for the region, where the Turkish Navy has been sailing very close, both to islands very close to mainland Kea and also along the Attica coast, exercising its legitimate right of passage, but that doesn't involve carrying out manoeuvres, which apparently and movements which apparently the Turkish fleet has been doing, and that's led to the problems with the survey ships. Has led to reciprocal action by Cyprus in blocking the Turkish energy chapter in the EU process, and that really is a negative side all round, because if oil or other minerals are found in the exclusive economic zone, well, that should be for the benefit of both sides of the Green Line and the island's economy as a whole. If minerals are found, if oil is found, it will be a long time before they could be exploited anyway, and I would hope that by the time they get round to putting the oil rigs, if they find any oil, we'd have had a reunified island that can benefit from that economic exploitation as a whole. Northern Cyprus and the EU as well. Well, we've got the 259 million aid package aimed, this is the actual purpose of that money, to bring the Turkish Cypriots closer to Europe and to facilitate a settlement. The money has gone very slowly. As of October last year, only 119.5 million, less than half of the money had actually been tendered. only half of that, 60.8 million, had actually been contracted, and only 24.5 million, less than 10%, had actually been spent. So it's been a very slow process, and a lot of that hasn't been spent in a very visible way either. Some very important in terms of capacity building, particularly in terms of training and teaching, but not a great deal to show on the ground. One of the issues that's arisen is Mr. Talat seems to think that it's his money. It isn't. It's actually not TRNC money. It's actually EU money for the EU to spend. And what I found very interesting was when I was in Cyprus, I met the new EU Commission Head of Representation, Androula Kaminara, who was actually a British Greek Cypriot, if you know what I mean.
BBC.
Who I found very impressive. Unlike her predecessor, she will travel to the north. She's not going to get hung up on passport issues like her predecessor. And she is desperately trying to involve the Turkish Cypriots much more in EU seminars, events, trying to spread a great understanding of how the EU operates, what the EU needs from the north, and what the EU can offer to the north. And I think a good example of that in the negotiations, there have been one or two things that have come out. For example, a suggestion that came from the Turkish Cypriots that they wanted 2 central banks in Cyprus. Well, that simply is not possible under EU rules. Cyprus is now part of the European Central Bank through the membership of the Euro, and you can't have another central bank. It's impossible. And I think that comes out of an ignorance, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, a lack of knowledge of some of the intricacies of how the EU operates in the north. And if Mrs. Kaminara can put a lot more effort into trying to break down those barriers, which were originally erected by the Denktash regime, who wouldn't let any of the EU materials into the north at all. And I remember several years ago, during the reign of Mr. Denktash, actually, I found it bizarre, smuggling EU pamphlets into one of my trips across the Green Line to give to the Turkish Cypriot Chamber of Commerce, who were desperate for more information about the EU. It was one of the most bizarre things I've ever done. The thought of smuggling EU documents was... Anyway, those days are now over, and we can actually start to see, I hope, greater information, greater understanding of the EU as a result of that. We've got to look at the role of Turkey in northern Cyprus, of course. We have the military occupation of 20 to 30,000 troops. Both sides actually claim that there are more troops than there actually are for their own purposes, for their own political purposes. The Turks and the Turkish Cypriots want to say they've got a lot more troops than they have for their own political reasons, to say that they're strong and powerful. The Greek Cypriots want to build up the numbers for their own political reasons. But I actually found, talking to UNFICYP, the best analysis of what was going on. It's certainly not stable. The Green Line is not stable. People think it is, and it's not. There's little provocations all the time. You don't get to hear about them unless you go along with UNFICYP and get a very, very detailed briefing from them. But people on both sides of the Green Line, the Turkish army, people in the National Guard, do try and wind each other up from time to time by doing silly things, silly gestures, a bit of name calling. And that shows how unstable it is, because each of those little provocations could easily flare up from either side. But what UNFICYP told us was that in practice they actually think the numbers of Turkish troops and Turkish militia is probably towards the bottom end of that estimate, around 20,000. So Turkey could actually declare a reduction in troop numbers without actually having to take any soldiers away at all. They would have exactly the same number of soldiers, but the declared number would be lower, and that would actually have an impact in reducing tension and could be seen as a confidence-building measure. We've also seen the new Turkish commander in the north, General Zorlu. We'll have to see how that pans out. But he has played a very important role in peacekeeping work around the world, for example in Afghanistan. And he has a reputation of being a very effective peacekeeper. So let us hope that creates a climate where tensions can also be reduced. And the one or two things I'll mention later on where I think that he could be put to the test, where minor concessions could be made without any great loss of face or loss of security for the Turkish Cypriots. On the other side, the new permanent secretary in the foreign ministry in Ankara is seen as a hardliner. So that again, like everything in the Cyprus world, is one step forward, 2 steps back, or the other way around. I don't think we can ignore what's happening in the economy in the island. The Turkish Cypriot economy is very weak. It is built on casinos and nightclubs and universities and the property boom. The property boom has come to a grinding halt. which is on the one hand bad for the Turkish Cypriot economy, but on the other hand potentially good for a settlement, because one of the real barriers to settlement was building on Greek Cypriot land, which was creating facts in the ground all the time, making it harder. They've had negative growth, in other words, shrinkage of the economy by 5% over the last year, and there's no doubt the Turkish Cypriot economy will be bankrupt without the Turkish subsidy, which amounts to 14.4% of their budget. 39% of the Turkish Cypriot budget is spent on the public sector pay. With 15 to 20,000 employees, it's very inflated. And Turkey is now getting a bit fed up with it as well. I don't think they'll cut the subsidy off, but they are demanding a wage freeze at the very least, which is not going to be popular at these times. And I think we'll also, despite what the Greek Cypriots say, start to see pressure on the Republic's economy as well. I mean, it is very dependent on things that will be squeezed by the credit crunch, like tourism. The first thing that tends to go is a foreign holiday. And I think that will be potentially difficult for them as well. That brings me to the issue of confidence building measures, and there are differences of view about this on the island, some in principle, some in theory and some in practice. I think confidence building measures are needed because the talks are moving slowly. They are under a pretty well tight news blackout, which is very unusual for Cyprus, in that very little has leaked out about which issues have ended up in each of the three baskets. And that is a positive sign in that nobody's leaking and therefore trying to undermine the talks by leaking. But on the other hand, people do get frustrated when they see very little happening. And confidence building measures, therefore, I think are needed to continue to maintain confidence between the two communities when the talks are showing slow progress with little coming out. And a good example of that was the Leader Street opening in April last year, which gave a real boost to people's morale on the island. Unfortunately, that hasn't been seen through by the other things that need to be done, like restoring the buildings. And that confidence building measure could easily be undermined if one of the buildings collapses and blocks the road. What's going to happen then? Mr. Talat doesn't like the idea of confidence building measures. He thinks the concentration should be entirely on a comprehensive solution, as he put it to us, and also implementing confidence building measures is difficult because of the recognition issue. Mr. Christofias thinks confidence building measures are a good idea, but he's also concerned about the recognition issue and how difficult it is to implement some of the things without that. Now, if there's a will, there's a way, and a lot of those things that could be done through NGOs, like, for example, the issue of green line trade was resolved through certification through the Turkish Cypriot Chamber of Commerce. And I'm sure if there was a will to do so, we could find NGOs that could implement some of the confidence building measures without either side having to get hung up on the recognition issue. Stefano, the presidential spokesman, said there is a need to create and promote a culture of friendship and mutual trust, and admit mistakes and crimes that both communities committed in the past. Well, one way of doing that is through confidence building measures. And the technical committees have agreed 16 issues, and they've announced, they've probably done more now since I wrote this note, which is a month old, and they've announced recommendations on criminal justice, on the economy, on cultural heritage, on crisis management, on humanitarian health measures, on the environment, and each of those in turn could form the basis of a confidence building measure that would improve the daily lives of Cypriots on both sides of the Green Line. Of course, what we don't see as confidence building measures are things that actually are, like the Missing Persons Committee, which is now functioning very well. I visited the laboratory for the third time when I was there at the end of the year. We saw both the Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot and the UN representative. It's very good that this has not been politicised by either side. They've had 466 exhumations so far, 352 Greek Cypriot, 104 Turkish Cypriot, and 10 as yet unidentified. 110 sets of remains have been returned, 78 to Greek Cypriots, 32 to the Turkish Cypriots. So it's still pretty much in proportion as to the number of missing people, which were, as of 74, 1493 Greek Cypriots, and from Turkish Cypriots from 63, 64, 503. So the numbers that have been identified and remains returned is roughly in kilter with that. They need $3 million a year for their annual budget. They live hand to hand. The UK has given $160,000 towards the Missing Persons Committee over the 3 years, 04 to 07, and I think it's about time we should be putting a bit more in. What's important is the work is being done bi-communally. When it started in earnest, we had experts, particularly from Argentina, who come to train the experts from the island, but now the Argentinians have pretty well dropped out of the picture, and the work is being done both in terms of the digging up by the forensic archaeologists on the site, by mixed teams of Greek and Turkish Cypriots. I visited a site last time I was there where they were excavating Turkish Cypriots near Larnaca, Nicosia. And the scientific work and identification is also being done by communal teams, and that is working very effectively. They've got at least 2 years worth of exhumations to go, so and then the process of identification will go on beyond that as well. Now, one of the issues that's arisen very recently has been the Old Gat's confession, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out beyond the initial reactions from both sides.
Sorry, are you talking about the actor?
Yes, who confessed to killing 10 Greek Cypriots, although he's since retracted his confession. I think we go by what he originally said in 1974. And
They're prisoners.
Yeah, prisoners, yeah. And that, I think, created the initial reaction you'd expect from both sides. And I think what we really have to now see is how that plans out in more detail. The Republic, as I think it was bound to do, has reported the issue to the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers for investigation. But I actually had yesterday an email from the Turkish Cypriot Human Rights Foundation, the chairman of which is Emily Irk, who I think most people know, and I think she said some quite sensible things in this. She talks about the confession that Olgas has done, and also at the same time the confession of a Greek Cypriot in relation to what happened in 63-64. And she goes on to say this: in order to reach a deep and lasting peace between the two communities, all sides have to confront not just their own suffering, but also their contribution to the suffering of others, irrespective of religion, language and ethnic origin. The time has come to discuss in greater depth effective and constructive processes or mechanisms which can help relieve the suffering of those who still have no information about the fate of their loved ones, which can also help all sides to come to terms with their contribution to the events that cause such suffering. Now, I actually think that's quite a positive statement, and it actually chimes with the statement I read out earlier on from Mr. Stefano.
Yes.
So both sides are actually starting to say the right sort of things. I think it's too soon to start talking about a South African type peace reconciliation process. We're still grappling with how we can do this in Northern Ireland. But I think the fact that people are starting to think about this on both sides of the Green Line is a very positive step. And I think that the UN are quite right, as far as the Missing Persons Committee, not to get into that. What their job is to do is to recover the remains, identify them and return them. Don't get involved in investigating or trying to apportion blame or anything else. But there will come a time when we have to start thinking about this, and I think that people are good on both sides that are talking about this is a positive sign. We've also got the issue of demining. The UNDP have cleared 51 minefields, 9,163 mines, and 6.5 million square metres have now been cleared. This has been largely funded by the EU, but they still need another €5 million to clear the rest. And there have been arguments about who should pay for this. That would clear the rest of the buffer zone. To clear the rest of the buffer zone would be €4 million. And I'm pleased that after I raised this during the debate in Parliament, which I called 2 or 3 weeks ago, the following week, 10 days later, there was an announcement from the Foreign Office, from Caroline Flint, that we will cough up €50,000 as the UK's contribution. It's only 10% of the overall total. Is it 10% of one? Yeah, 10% of the overall total. But it is actually a major contribution, and I hope other people will follow our example. And if the buffer zone could be cleared, that represents actually 3% of the total land of Cyprus. If that land could be liberated from mines, it could be freed off for civilian use, and could then start to form part of the settlement process. The Turkish Cypriots don't want to see a change in status of that land, but it is land going to waste, and could again, I think, form part of the confidence building process if it's done properly. But I'd like to say something about education. We met Olympia Stilianou, who's the permanent secretary at the Republic's Ministry of Education. There's a new policy. There's an emphasis on the creation of a culture of peaceful cohabitation. The history books are undergoing revision by the Turkish Cypriots. The Greek Cypriots are reviewing their history books, involving rewriting the books through a committee of experts with a view to producing a new draft of the history curriculum in the summer of this year. And that has to be good, because both sides, building on what I said earlier, have to start being realistic about the past, however painful it may be. There's also progress on learning Turkish in in the Greek Cypriot side, but the Turkish Cypriot curriculum does not include Greek, which is a pity. The Agios Antonios school, who I visited not this time but the previous occasion, is a very constructive project, and what I found absolutely amazing going around this bi-communal school in Limassol was in the Turkish Cypriot classroom they even have a picture of Ataturk on the wall and nobody has objected to it. So it's not just that they are actually being very positive about trying to make sure, no matter how painful the image of Ataturk may be to Greek Cypriots, they are being very positive in the way they're training Turkish Cypriots, teaching Turkish Cypriots. And those of you who saw the Friends of Cyprus report last time round would have seen a picture on the front, which I took, of the school kids doing dance in national costume, and you'll be hard pressed to tell which was the Greek Cypriot and which was the Turkish Cypriot girl from that picture. Rizo Capasso, they're no longer censoring the books, which is a good sign, and they're following the Greek Cypriot curriculum. They now have a lower secondary school, though I have to say not many students are left to go there. So I think what's happening is that, certainly as far as the Republic is concerned, they are trying to create a Cypriot inclusive identity, and I hope that we're going to see some progress on that. Crossing points, as I mentioned earlier on, Lady Street is open, but there were 3 stages of the Lady Street process: opening the crossing, restoration of the buildings, and then disengagement of forces around it. And that is being further progressed by the Turkish military. I don't think they were particularly happy about the opening of the crossing point in the first place, and that was a very positive movement by Mr Talat, who took them on that. The Limnitis crossing is completely bogged down. It's got linked to the issue with the Kokina enclave. President Christofias says there's a possibility of Turkish Cypriot civilians going to Kokina, but there's no civilians living there. It's all entirely military, but he would not allow military supplies or military traffic, and neither, for that matter, would the UN allow that to happen. So, unfortunately, that's got bogged down, and we're not going to get a great deal of progress until the Turkish army changes its view about that. Looking at civil society, AKEL and SDP contacts have significantly improved over the last year, which is good compared to 2 years ago when the annual youth camp had stopped happening and things were very difficult. But civil society is less effective in the north after SDP won the elections. I think things calmed down a bit there, or cooled down a bit there. On trade, Green Line trade is starting to work. There are no silly games being played, as I understand it, on the Greek Cypriot side anymore. But there's still less than 5% of the exports from the north are going through the Green Line. There's pressure on people in the north not to use Limassol for export, or Larnaca for export, and that really does need to stop if there's going to be real progress, because there are real benefits from progress about that. International Peace Research Institute in Oslo has worked out that a settlement would benefit each household in Cyprus by €5,500 for each year for the first 7 years after the solution. So that would be a significant benefit, bearing in mind how uncompetitive the Turkish Cypriot business sector actually is. Economic development would be a real incentive to make progress there. Timing, well, I mentioned earlier on that it was an open-ended process, but will it be able to make progress before events start to catch up with it? We've got the Turkish Cypriot elections on the 19th of April. It's anyone's guess how they're going to turn out. We've got the Turkish Cypriot presidential elections next year. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, the Turkish accession review. Facts on the ground are created not just by development and settlers, they're also created by electoral consequences. And that is potentially, although there's no formal timetable, going to start impacting inevitably on the process. I haven't had a chance to read the UK Foreign Affairs Committee report in detail, which was published today, but they make the point that really progress has got to be made by July 2009, otherwise events start to catch up on it. Looking at facts on the ground, settlers in the north, nobody really knows how many. You can see estimates that vary enormously. But a couple of facts that I found very instrumental and interesting were that only 3% of the children in the schools in the north are Turkish Cypriots. That comes from the Turkish Cypriot Teachers Union. And 93% of hospital patients in the north are settlers. Now that last figure you have to take with a pinch of salt, because a lot of the Turkish Cypriots are using the hospitals in the south free. But the schools, I think, is quite an important statistic. Although settler families tend to be a lot bigger than Turkish Cypriot families, that is a remarkable number, and I've got no reason to doubt its accuracy because it's come from a Turkish Cypriot source. On the positive side, the naturalisation of Turkish Cypriots that was happening under the Denktash regime has ground a halt, and there have only been 160 naturalised people by Mr. Tat's administration since 2005. One thing I noticed when I was travelling through the north was mosque building. There was significant mosque building going on Greek Cypriot land. A lot of mosques, far more than I'd ever seen before. Half built, three quarters built and recently finished. There's a big question about who's paying for it, but that is, I think, a worrying indication as well. On the property side, well, being on Greek Cypriot land, as I mentioned down before, has slowed to a halt due to the recession. But the land building that had been going on before does have territorial implications, particularly in the Morfu area, which was due to be returned under the Annan plan and will become a, I suspect, greater issue and contention under the present negotiations. The Turkish Cypriot Property Commission is quite interesting as well. That is a matter that is being looked at, as everybody knows, by the European Court of Human Rights as to whether that provides an adequate remedy to the various property cases being brought by Greek Cypriots. But the most up-to-date figures, I think, are a lot higher than people thought. There have been 729 Greek Cypriot applications to the Turkish Cypriot Property Commission. 41 have been finalised, which is not very many, of which 35 involved compensation, €8 million in total, 3 involved restitution, 2 involved an exchange of property, and 1 involved restitution on settlement of the Cyprus problem. Although not many have been finalised, the fact that Greek Cypriots are starting to make these applications in greater numbers, despite being discouraged from doing so by the Republic's government, is again a sign of facts changing on the ground and people becoming impatient and wanting effectively to say, okay, well that's that, at least let me benefit from the money that that land is worth. Green line crossings have also been in decline. Up to April 2006, on average, there were 1.2 million Greek Cypriots crossing north and 2.2 million Turkish Cypriots crossing south. That number to the year to April 2008 has halved, with 633,000 Greek Cypriots travelling north and 1.2 million Turkish Cypriots travelling south. Obviously, some of those will be repeat visits, but the fact that the number has halved shows that people are engaging rather less than they had. We don't have any statistics for people crossing through the sovereign base areas. I'd like to see that we would keep those numbers, because that would help perhaps give us a fuller picture, but unfortunately those numbers aren't available. One thing we're also starting to see are Turkish Cypriots claiming their political rights in the Republic under the 1960 Constitution. When I saw Mr. Anastasiades years ago, and I mean years ago, he predicted that without a settlement this was what was going to start happening. And I think what he predicted is starting to prove to be correct. We've seen efforts to claim voting rights in the south by Ali Arel and a number of his associates. We will see if this actually comes to fruition, but Shena Levent, the newspaper editor from Africa, of African newspaper, not from Africa, has said that he intends to stand as a candidate in the European parliamentary elections in the summer. He will claim his candidacy rights. He's not too bothered about having to fill in the forms whichever language he has to do. And he thinks he's got a reasonable chance because of the way the PR system works for Europe. You don't need a very high percentage of people voting for you to win. And some of the smaller parties in the Republic ought to be a little worried if this is what he decides to do and sees it through, because you only need maybe 15, probably 18% of votes to win. And Channel Event is quite popular in the south, so we will see. I'd like to turn now just briefly to, I've been talking quite a long time, to issues related to human rights. I actually spoke about these in greater length in the debate we had at the end of December in Parliament. In fact, that wasn't on Cyprus, and I had a bit of a spat with the chair at the time to try and make these points. And I don't want to talk about the general issues, about that everybody goes on about. I want to talk about one or two specific, deprivation of property, expropriation, all that. I mean, that's a pretty sterile thing, and everybody knows the arguments about that. I just want to focus on one or two specific issues. First of all, the enclave in the Carpaths, who I visited for the second time when I was there, and their lot has not improved very much. The UN Secretary General recently reported on the tight restrictions they're under, which hamper UN humanitarian and monitoring operations. There are only 250 or so left. They are ageing. There are not many children left. There's no right of families to return there. There are difficulties. There's no right to run a business. Business has been expropriated. Homes are in poor condition and modernised. And there have been home demolitions and people have been moving away for a bit. And there's no doubt that people there are living in pretty extreme poverty and virtual destitution. From what I saw with my own eyes, I could see the properties that people were living in. They were pretty shabby condition, and they feel that they do not have a fair crack at the rule of law from the Turkish Cypriots. I also visited the Maronites villages for the first time. There are only 142 of them left, and they have a very real fear that their society, their culture will completely disappear. Their language will die out, and they will simply become assimilated. And that, I think, they're probably now, I regret to say, below the critical mass that you need to maintain a separate community identity. We visited the 4 villages, or tried to. At Agia Marina, we were not allowed to visit the church there. It is inside the Turkish army camp. We were refused entry. Very politely, I have to say. There was no confrontation. The Turkish army was very polite, but said that we wanted to go, we had to refer it to the general. So I think they wrote it to General Zorlu to see if we'll let them go. At a Somatos, they're only allowed to visit on a Sunday for a couple of hours. Only a couple of old ladies still live in that village, and what I found quite petty actually is they've taken the bell rope away from the church bell, so they can't ring the bell, which is a bit petty to me, but there we are. And similarly, in Apostolis Andreas I visited in the car pass, they rang the church bell while we were there, and the police came and stopped them doing it, which again is a bit petty. I don't think anyone's really particularly hurt by the noise of a church bell, but that happened. And it's not just Greek Cypriots who are affected by this. In early December, 2 young Turkish Cypriots were arrested and taken to court in the north, remanded in custody for 7 days for insulting Mr. Talat on a Facebook group they'd set up. And it wasn't the sort of things they wrote about. I mean, people write about me all the time, or far worse about Gordon Brown or any of our politicians, or for that matter, Conservative leadership. Far worse stuff. But to lock somebody up for 7 days for saying, so you're president now, you think you're a big ass, is a bit much. And then setting the police on to trying to track down the other 140 odd members of the Facebook group was somewhat disproportionate, I would suggest. And I'm afraid that just makes me think, what is going on in terms of the rule of law and a sense of proportion about what's going on in the north. A couple of points on the legal cases that are going on. The Orestes case, this is a case that the European Court brought concerning an orchard in Famagusta. This is a Turkish Cypriot Property Commission case. 8 cases have been designated as test cases by the European Court. They've just ruled again that they're not yet in a position to determine the effectiveness of the remedy. And there are 32 other cases that have been admitted, but have not yet made much progress. One is for 130 million euros. So in the end, if the Turkish Cypriot Property Commission is found to be an adequate remedy, and all these people claim, it will bankrupt Turkey, never mind the Turkish Cypriot economy. It will be billions. So in the end, I think that shows the importance of trying to get a sensible solution. It works the other way as well. The Sophie case is a Turkish Cypriot challenging the guardianship law in the Republic, and the European Court is allowing a hearing on the effectiveness of the Republic courts on property rights there. The Orams case we all know about. The Advocate General opinion is quite supportive of the Greek Cypriot land of which the Orams built. So we'll see their houses in Brighton, wherever it is, disappearing and becoming occupied by Greek Cypriot. We will see what happens on that, but that seems to be going in that particular direction. The missing persons cases, this is the Varnavas case, has now been rumbling on for 18 years. There was a full Grand Chamber hearing on the 19th of November over the lack of investigation of the deaths of 9 missing persons. And the issue is the Committee of Persons not an effective investigation. Well, it isn't. That's not its role. These were primarily soldiers who were missing. One was seen alive in photographs of prisoners. So we've had the hearing, we're waiting the outcome of that in the courts. In the Cyprus courts, the Turkish Cypriots applied to the Republic of Cyprus Supreme Court for a judicial review over the lack of investigation concerning a missing person there. That will probably end up in Strasbourg. The Greek Cypriot states an act of state, an issue for the President, and that's being appealed within the Greek Cypriot courts and may well end up in Strasbourg. And there's a case called Pasha where a Greek Cypriot is suing the Republic in the Republic's courts for not telling the family that their missing person, who was a reservist National Guard person, had been buried on the Greek Cypriot side since 1974, and the Greek Cypriot government knew about it and didn't bother to tell the family. So, you know, you see these cases and they go in all sorts of different directions. It's not all Greek Cypriots against Turkey. You've got Greek Cypriots against Greek Cypriots. You've got Turkey Cypriots against Greek Cypriots. It goes every which way there is. And these cases are, for me as a lawyer, interested in human rights, fascinating. But they, again, show the importance of trying to get a solution. So, what should our government be doing? Well, I don't think we should do what we did before. We should be supporting efforts of both sides, but not getting involved in the detail like we do on Ireland. That was a road to nowhere. We should be encouraging confidence-building measures. We put our money into demining. We should be prepared to put up the sovereign base area land at the appropriate point, as we did in the Zenon plan. We don't need it. It should go back to part of the overall solution. And we shouldn't get too hung up on the Treaty of Guarantee either. That's an anachronism. I think Greece thinks that probably the same way as well. It's trying to convince Turkey that it's an anachronism too. Cyprus should be an independent state without having foreign troops from anybody on its land. So to conclude, this is it. I just think if these two leaders, given their long personal political history of cooperation, can't achieve a result, it's unlikely anyone can. Neither side's got a plan B. The plan B is the status quo, which becomes, as time goes by, an entrenchment of the division on the island. Both sides have got to show flexibility on the process. We've got tactical positions, but we have to see a breakthrough. And I think whilst you can never say this is the last chance if it fails, any new effort in the future will be starting from a worse position. And I think if there's a referendum, the choice of the referendum isn't this plan or something else. The choice of the referendum will be this plan or partition. That's it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, went off far longer than expected.
Such a comprehensive coverage. In fact, I was impressed with your facts and figures, which means, of course, you follow developments so closely.
It's very good to do with parliamentary questions.
Yes. And I would like to know, all these visits you described, you've been to the Karpas and you've been to Maronite villages, was it within the framework of the committee as a whole, or did you individually also additional visits?
No, we went as part of the Friends of Cyprus visit.
That was a very, very good program.
Yeah, we were there for longer than we normally went, actually.
Yeah.
Normally go, we were there for a week. And in the north, we visited the politicians in the north, and had time with Mr. Talat. We had a programme set up by the Maronites for us. First time we've done that, and I think that everybody's forgotten about the Maronites in this process.
Maria made sure that you
Maria made sure we went. Maria Copley made sure we went. And we went to the Karpas via Famagusta, where we met the mayor of Famagusta, the Turkish Cypriot mayor of Famagusta. And again, this is a little wrangle here, because we met the Greek Cypriot mayor of Famagusta in the Swedish ambassador's residence, and he was complaining about this, that and the other, about the Turkish Cypriot not meeting him and all this sort of thing. But the Turkish Cypriot is prepared to come to the south to meet the Greek Cypriot mayor, but the Greek Cypriot mayor is not prepared to go north to meet the Turkish Cypriot mayor. So it does make things rather difficult to try and make progress on the Famagusta issue.
And of course, Karpas area is like a pilgrimage for you.
Well,
you make sure every time to go there.
I've been there twice now, and I think that part of the reason for going is to show the people who live there that other people are interested in them. They think they're forgotten about.
And another thing,
because it's so far to go.
With you looking your notes, you have been surprised with the additional number of people who have double as the number we had at the beginning. Anyway, the talk wasn't only comprehensive one, it was thought-provoking and I hope question-provoking as well. So this is a time for questions, remarks,
I have a
comments.
question, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
that's yours as well.
Okay. As you know, I'm from Turkish newspaper.
Yes.
Stranger.
Korea edition, yeah.
Had a little bit search about your parliamentary vote. I find out you vote against the investigation of the Iraqi war. Also, you voted for the Iraqi war. Is that correct?
I voted for the Iraq War, yes.
Okay, so could you please tell me what is your role exactly in the Cyprus issues?
What is my
Role.
role?
Yeah.
My role?
And how are you going to find a solution?
Well, Iraq wasn't anything to do with Cyprus. My role is an honest backbench politician who thinks that because I'm a backbencher, I can say things that government ministers can't. I can throw ideas into the pot. I can observe what goes on. I can draw my own conclusions, and I can say what I like in that respect. And some things I say will offend Greek Cypriots. Some things I say will offend Turkish Cypriots. But I tell it how it is. And I think that one of the real things about Cyprus is that people don't recognise the other side's point of view as much as they should. And before I was an MP, as Kyriacos said, I was a personal injury lawyer, which meant litigation in court. And if you're going to settle a case, you had to know what the other side wanted. And you had to realise that nobody wins 100% of any court case. What you try and do is maximise your position, but to get a settlement, you have to give something to the other side. And because I've had that experience in legal practice for 20 years, I can see that people will have to make painful concessions to get a solution. The question is, do people want a solution? That's the real question. I think one of the real issues is that neither community is really prepared, because their politicians haven't prepared them for it, for the concessions that will have to be made to get a solution. That's the difficult part. When I say we need to see a breakthrough, somebody's going to have to blink and say, okay, I'm prepared to make a big concession to get a solution. And that will have to happen by one side or the other. And the question is, who wants the solution most? And each side's got a lot to play for. The Turkish Cypriot economy is a basket case. For the standard of living of Turkish Cypriots, they have to have a solution. The Greek Cypriots are desperate for a solution because of the way they've been deprived of their assets for 30 odd years. So both sides have really got a stake in trying to make progress. And you know, as time goes on, it gets harder. One of the interesting facts that I heard a couple of years ago now was that 2/3 of the Cypriots alive today, on both sides, were not alive in 1974. They know no different. And they've lived with effective partition all their lives. You know, it's a gamble. You know, they say, well, no, what's the problem?
Sorry,
It's a generational thing too. So the longer it goes on, the harder it gets.
Sorry.
Yes, an additional.
As you know, it's been a very long time. Both sides trying to find a solution, but people who works on the find solutions are waiting again for the war. This is the key point. Like I just want to point out for you are as an MP of the British government, you vote for the war, and you against the investigation of the Iraqi war, and you're trying to find a solution between Cyprus and the.
But that is nothing to do with Cyprus. You know, at the same basis, I voted for the intervention in Kosovo to protect the Muslims who have been slaughtered in Kosovo by the Serbs. You know, I don't think that that's anything to do with the issue of Cyprus. Yet yesterday, I was making a speech on the issues of Sri Lanka, arguing for a ceasefire in Sri Lanka, which is a terrible war, far worse, in fact, than what's been going on in the Middle East. You know, people have been very focused on what's been happening in Gaza and southern Israel, but far more people are dying in Sri Lanka, and nobody's taken a blind bit of notice. And that's the sort of things I've been raising too. So, you know, we can analyse. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about why I voted for the Iraq War. You know, it would take me half an hour to explain it. We're here to talk about Cyprus, and my position here is somebody who's had an interest in Cyprus ever since I was a member of Parliament. And over the years, I've met a lot of people. I've seen a lot of things. I've learned a lot of things, and I've got an analysis. That's my personal analysis. It's not the government analysis, and it's up to you whether you agree with me or disagree with me. But that's my views.
And also, I had some,
I'm sorry, Chair, could you...
the Greek
Can we go to another one and then we come back?
Sure.
Well, my question is going to be about increasing. You said something about increasing identity in the Cyprus. Well, who is trying to create this increasing identity while the both sides are divided and there is no connection between them? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think trying to create a Cypriot identity, not an increased identity, a Cypriot identity.
Well, yeah.
And I think what I mean by that is, in the Republic, this is one of the policies that's come out of their new education policy. And what they're trying to do is to say, okay, we're not Greek Cypriots, we're not Turkish Cypriots, we are Cypriots. And when I talk to Turkish Cypriots who are interested in making progress, one of the things they emphasise to me is we are Cypriots, to draw a distinction between themselves and the settlers. And I think that what we're trying to do is to build those bridges that existed prior to 74, prior to 1960, prior to 1963, when people did live together. And the point I made about the primary school was that if you put, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots together, school kids, you can't tell the difference because they look the same. And it's only when they start talking their own language that you notice the difference. So what I think is important is that each side starts to learn the other's language, and that we build those civil society connections. The Society on Historical Research is one of those, for example.
Do you see any bridge to increase or create an identity at the moment? Well, I don't see any bridge, or I don't see any relationship between these two sides. As, for example, like some radical groups in southern Cyprus, they can see their, for example, their map. There's like sort of blood coming from north to south, or like this sort of radical movements you can see at the both sides. So I don't see any bridge to increase the identity. How do you see them?
Well, you can focus on extreme views on both sides. 2/3 of Greek Cypriots voted for a pro-solution candidate, 1/3 didn't. Yeah? Follows. And similarly, if you were to conduct a poll of the Turkish Cypriots, when they had the Annan plan, roughly 2/3 voted for a solution and 1/3 didn't, in round terms.
I think
in round terms, yeah? I mean, you can talk about the exact numbers. So you do have people who are sceptical about a deal on either side, who do want to hold out for their absolute position. But equally, you've got 2/3 of the population on each side of the Green Line who do want to try and find a solution, who do want to come together. The trick is to get the 2/3 saying the same thing at the same time. That's the real trick. And hopefully you can bring in people who've got more extreme views in that process. In the end, you have to engage with everybody. And the deal was done in Northern Ireland, not by the moderate parties. The deal was actually done in Northern Ireland, although I'm very reluctant to draw parallels, by the two extreme sides, by Sinn Féin and the DUP. It's only when those two were prepared to sign on the dotted line that we actually made real progress through the Good Friday Agreement. So it can be done. And George Mitchell's now going to try and do the same with Hamas and the Israelis. And I wish him luck. But his view is, and I think this is right, there is no international problem that is not capable of a political solution, and Cyprus is capable of a political solution. We don't have the big religious divides like you have in the Middle East, or the big ethnic divides like you have in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world, or in Sri Lanka, big ethnic and religious divide. What you have in Cyprus are two communities that have got a different language, but they've got a common heritage, and you ought to try to be building bridges across that, build it, accentuate the positive. So that's why I think what's happening on the education world is quite positive on that. It is a very, very small green shoot, but it's positive. And I think we have to try and accentuate the process, which is why I was talking about the confidence building measures too, because that's all part of that.
What do you have to say to those skeptics that they claim that actually the negotiations are between the Greek Cypriots and Ankara, and not between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots?
Well, I think in the end, if there's going to be a solution, it will require Ankara's imprimatur, because one of the key issues, for example, is the question of Turkish troops. One of the key issues is the issue of settlers, and you can't solve either of those issues without Turkey's agreement. Never mind the political solution. There are some practical things that would need Turkey's approval for. Do I think that Mr. Talat can negotiate at all? Yes, I can. And the fact that he stood up and said we're going to open Ledger Street in defiance of the Turkish army was a positive sign. Is he 100% able to negotiate a deal on his own? No, I don't think he can. in the end, Turkey will still call the shots. But that's not to say that he can't make progress on a lot of these key issues. And the fact that the technical committees have been able to reach agreement on 13 issues is a sign of that. But we're still waiting for the big breakthrough. And time is not on the side of a solution. Even though it's not, as I said, it's an open-ended process, time is working against the solution every month it goes by. And I have to say, if anybody supports DECA, I'm sorry, but we had 4 years loss under the previous president where nothing happened. No progress was made, I'm afraid. You got into the EU and you got into Euro, but as far as the Cyprus solution is concerned, no progress.
Yes.
In my view.
Two things, please.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I'm getting very Cypriot politics.
First of all, I'd just like to say to my friend over here,
Secret temperature.
when you talk about the island, with the blood coming down, up until a couple of years ago, if you visited the World Travel Market, the Turkish Cypriot stand, which was connected with the Turkish stand, had Cyprus as a strip only of the occupied area. The whole country was not shown. So Cyprus was given a whole new shape. Now that's what the Greek Cypriots had to contend with. I know what you meant, but what I'm saying is this is both sides. Hold on, this is the World Travel Market. Yes, not this year, up until 2 years ago. But my question is this. Confidence building measures, absolutely fantastic, and it seems to be a slow progress, but at least it's a progress in the right direction, as opposed to a stalemate, which hopefully it's not. I have a little bit of an issue sometimes with situations like, for instance, in the occupied area, why there is a refusal to teach the Greek language, whereas in the Republic, they've taken out under their belt and they're going ahead with it. They are showing Turkish-speaking programs on television. Obviously, the Turkish Cypriots come and use the hospitals, and they're paid national insurance or whatever if they're not working. What benefits do the Greek Cypriots have in the occupied area, or what concessions have been made by the occupants of that area?
Well, I hope that we will start to see Greek being taught in Turkish Cypriot schools. I mean, the fact is, I mentioned the history books. The Turkish Cypriots are actually ahead of the Greek Cypriots in revising the history curriculum. They're ahead of the Greek Cypriots. They've effectively pretty well completed that process. And if we can take out some of the hatred from the history books and some of the distortions, and can you ever have objective history? Well, that again is another time for another long debate. But you can try and get it a bit more objective than some of the appalling things that used to be written in the books before about the other side. That itself is progress, and we can always pick on the things that haven't been done. Let's concentrate on the things that have been done. And I would very much like to see Turkish Cypriot schools start teaching Greek. But equally, I mentioned the Greek Cypriot schools teaching Turkish. It's still not a huge amount yet. It's starting to. It's voluntary, but it's happening. And I'd like to see more of it, because in the end, I don't want to see English, the lingua franca of Cyprus, which is the consequence if you don't.
Yeah, I'd like just a little thing.
Remark.
Well, I mean, I am all for confidence building measures, although sometimes people thought I'm not. But I was glad to hear you say that truth and reconciliation actually is not the time now, because at some point, wrongly maybe, I had a feeling that Friends of Cyprus was more interested in pushing truth and reconciliation than actually trying to bring the communities together, because I think that pushing truth and reconciliation at the wrong time can be disastrous. So I'm very happy to hear. I don't know whether you're speaking as an individual, but somebody from Friends of Cyprus is now saying that actually it's, wrong time, but it should happen at some point, yes, wrong time.
Well, it is premature. But I think the fact you've got people like Emily Erk, who carries a lot of weight in the north, and you've got people like Mr. Stefano speaking on behalf of the president in the south, saying very similar things, shows that influential people on both sides are starting to think through that this is going to have to happen at some stage. You can't do it now. I mean, the very fact that we had this huge outcry over the confession shows that neither side's ready for it.
Can I just...
As communities. But that will work its way through, and then people have to start thinking about these ultimately.
May I just say one more thing? Emine Erk, I know that with the missing, there was some talk bringing people to justice, and Emine Erk seemed to be supporting that, and that worried me. And that statement, I don't know whether it shows that she has changed on this, or does she now, because I kept on thinking either one wants closure or one wants revenge, and I thought that this bringing people to justice before one had closure was a bit too early. Again, it's quite connected.
Well, I didn't see her this time. I saw the last time I was in, last but one time, and she was talking about this. And I think one of the issues, it's the frustration of trying to find out what happened, and it's the only game in town to try and get to the bottom of the story. And I don't think it's particularly helpful or constructive to go down that route, for either side, really. And I think if you look at what happened in South Africa, they had the political agreement, then the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after. And I think that's what we need to see here. You know, the idea of it, whatever it's going to be, should come as part of the solution, but operative afterwards. You can't do it the other way around because it will stymie the prospects of getting a solution. But people need to think about it. You know, we're trying to think about it in Northern Ireland now. We haven't come up with an answer 10 years on.
First, with regard to the comments you made about the Turkish Cypriot textbooks being ahead of the Greek Cypriot ones, I was kind of wondering what difference it makes if 97% of the children in the north aren't Turkish Cypriots. Secondly, the actual question I wanted to ask was in relation to General Zorlu. You mentioned that he was a more congenial character to work with, history of peacekeeping operations and the rest. I was wondering if you made any direct appeals to him, or if any British parliamentarians have actually talked directly with him, or if at the moment his views have been communicated by the authorities.
Well, looking backwards, as far as always, no, we didn't, and it's impossible for politicians to meet generals. It doesn't happen. And while I didn't say he's a more genial character, I said his track record in the Turkish army has been on peacekeeping operations, where he's done a very good job. As I mentioned, Afghanistan, for example, is that Turkey had a huge presence in Afghanistan soon after the American invasion, and he did a very good job there. And he's also, I think, been in Bosnia too. So he's got a good track record in that respect, which is why I think he may be more of an internationalist, let's put it that way, and prepared to look at some of these issues. Again, he'll take his orders from through the chain of command. He does have some freedom of movement as the commander in the north, but he will have to do the general staff of the hierarchy. We will see, but he's prepared to be a bit more flexible or not. As far as the textbooks are concerned, I mean, that's a good point, and I think that the answer to that is that settler families, some will stay. That's a fact. I think everybody realistically accepts that's going to happen. Well, those settler families need to know the truth of what happened in Cyprus, and not what the Ataturk textbooks from Turkish mainland would tell them. They need to know that if they're going to make Cyprus their home, and his families who will, I suspect, be allowed to stay, in whatever number is finally agreed, they need to know the truth about their homeland, their new homeland.
On that point, actually, what's your view on the issue of the settlers? Of course, that's one of the biggest roadblocks with regards to
that's a matter for the two leaders to sort out between themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned that obviously at some point, hopefully this year, the two leaders, hopefully at the same time, will both have to blink. For the viable solution that they always say they're for, where do you think for either leader is more likely to make concessions? Do you think that, say for example, the Greek Cypriot leadership will be trying to get some sort of special status for the Karpas, or will they be going for the much stronger central government, or will they be trying to get as much land as possible? Where do you think they might make the concession? And the same in the north. Will they be going to give back as less land as they can, or will they be wanting more separate states? Have you got any sense of what you think?
Well, very little's come out. We all know what the big issues are, the roadblocks. And there's going to be progress on those big issues across a range of them, really. And you can have sequential negotiation. Now, if you want to see sequential negotiation, look what happened to bring about the so-called Gaza ceasefire. The Israelis declared a unilateral ceasefire. Hamas fired 10 rockets into Israel and then said we're having a ceasefire too. But neither agreed that the other they were having a ceasefire, and it's been not much of a ceasefire either, but it's a lot worse than it was. And you can have those sequential concessions where somebody says, okay, I'm prepared to make this concession, knowing down the track somebody else is going to make a concession in return, but not in return.
But as they've said, they've got these baskets that they talk about every so often where all their disagreements are in. At some point in the summer, hopefully, there will come a point where Christophos will have to decide whether he is prepared to give up land or sovereignty or to try and get status for Karpas. And the same with Talat.
Yeah,
Have you got any sense of what they would want to hold on to most? Because it also will make a difference as far as what they offer the people to vote on. Are they going to try and get a vote winner, or are they going to try and get something that's viable?
Well, is that an either or? I mean, as far as the baskets are concerned, it's negotiation is nothing is agreed until everything's agreed. That has to be the position. When they come to empty the rather fuller baskets, they're going to have to do some pretty heavy-duty trading. But this is where I think Downer is important. As I said earlier on, he recognises that this isn't going to make a hill of beans unless people are prepared to vote for it. So you have to have a solution to put to both communities. There's enough in it for both communities for them to want to say yes. And the Annan plan didn't work. 2/3 of the Turkish Cypriots voted for it, and 2/3 of the Greek Cypriots voted against it in round terms. You've got to be able to maintain your 2/3 of Turkish Cypriots voting for it, but you've got to turn the opinion in the south. How do you do that? Beyond my pay grade, I'm afraid. I've got my own view.
He wouldn't be here if he knew, yes? Yes.
Thank you. Andrew, just a quick question from someone not from a Cypriot background, but you mentioned civil society and what's happening there, and you mentioned the political parties. From a trade union point of view, my understanding is that the unions in both the north and south have actually maintained quite good links over the years. What role do you see there in terms of helping to build people-to-people links and making this economic point that coming up with some kind of process ongoing is actually going to be best for people on both sides of the divide?
Well, I think it's important. I think the teaching unions have done a good job around that as well. I mean, one of the real problems after Shedepay when the election is that civil society in the north went into decline, and we can analyse the reasons why that happened. And I think partly it's because there's no opposition now. There's nothing to fight against. When you win, and you're in power, you're in a very different position to when you're in opposition. And that huge pressure that was building up for change, once Shedepay won the elections and Talat became the president, dissipated. And the question is, how do you create that climate where people are enthusiastic about trying to make some progress? And the traders got a key role to play there, yeah.
Yes.
They were part of the original broad coalition, including Shedepay and all the other opposition parties too, that brought Denktaş's downfall.
Mr. Dismore, you said that you are an honest broker, at least that's what you wanted to be.
Not so much an honest broker, an honest commentator, I think.
Honest commentator, indeed. But of course, your parliamentary record against the Turks is not very negative in that sense. In that sense, you are very negative to the Turkish side, especially your support of the so-called Armenian genocide. Within that context, what are you going to do in the future for Turks to be that honest commentator rather than a one-sided commentator?
Well, first of all, I don't think I'm a one-sided commentator. I think if you listen to what I had to say about Cyprus, I made points on behalf of both communities and both sides, and I had criticisms of both sides and complimentary things to say about both sides. But I go back to what I said earlier on. I tell you how I see it. Now, you may be Turkish, I don't know. You may think the Armenian genocide didn't happen. I think it did. 1.2 million people disappeared somewhere in 1915, and there's overwhelming evidence of what happened to them. Now, it may be a big issue for Turkey, and it may affect relations between Turkey and the rest of the world. But I do find it very difficult to understand Turkey's position in relation to the Armenian genocide, I have to say. For this reason, that nobody's holding anybody alive today responsible. Nobody's even holding the modern Turkish state responsible. The modern Turkish state was founded by Ataturk. The people who were responsible were the Ottomans, who are not the modern Turkish state. And that's why I find it very difficult to understand Turkey's position on this. Those people disappeared, they died. They died in Turkey, they died in Anatolia. What happened to them? And there's overwhelming documentary evidence from the American consul Morgenthau, who later had a very distinguished career in America, the German consul, talked about it. You know, there's plenty of evidence of what happened, and it's crazy not to recognise that. Let's recognise realities and move on. It's like denying the Holocaust. It happened. It's a fact.
Can I just add something?
That's my view. That's my view. It's not being against Turkey. I actually think, just to finish the point, I actually think it would be in Turkey's best interest internationally. It would gain so much kudos around the world and so much goodwill around the world to recognise what happened.
In that case, would you accept a challenge from Turks on the Armenian issue if the evidence, so-called evidence, is available to you? Would you accept a challenge from the Turkish side?
Would you accept a challenge? There is no challenge to it. There's no challenge.
I asked Mr. Dismore a very simple question. Would he accept a challenge from the Turkish side?
Well,
the
I can tell you
so-called
this.
evidence he has, I want him to show it to us so we can show our evidence.
Well, I can tell you this.
If you can say that, I'll be very happy.
Right, I'll tell you this. I have tabled a bill in Parliament over the issue of the Armenian genocide, which is due for debate in October. If you find an MP who wants to come and debate it with me, I'm happy to debate it.
Sorry, I have a last
On the floor of the
question.
House.
Would you not debate with me?
And I have to go, sorry for that.
Someone behind who raised his hand? No?
Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Could I ask the Friends of Cyprus,
Yes, sorry.
sorry, before other people get to speak another time, the Friends of,
I'm not here as Friends of Cyprus, I'm here as me.
Excuse me.
I beg your pardon.
Yes,
The
but
gentleman,
But the Friends of Cyprus have existed for a long time, and many of us around this table have been to innumerable years of Friends of Cyprus and their activities. I was wondering what the Friends of Cyprus can do as a think tank to promote new ideas which might help the parties in Cyprus to break the deadlock. I have heard you speak about money being provided for mine clearance, but there are some other ideas, two in particular, that I would like to raise for your attention and for further debate. One is an issue which was very contentious in the Annan plan, which is that the property issue, which is currently being discussed, could be solved by the Cyprus government compensating people whose property has been lost. Would that not be one area where the EU, on Britain's urging, could insert some funding in order to alleviate some of the anxieties which exist in Cyprus? So that is point number one. Point number two, another very contentious issue which has been talked about for donkey's years with no apparent solution is the issue of settlers. Now, the issue of settlers is numerically, if one looks at it in a EU context, a very small number. Could the EU as a whole not assist the parties in Cyprus by possibly offering move-on immigration facilities for some of those settlers who might actually be very keen to take up such options to move elsewhere in Europe and thus assist Cyprus by actually moving what is a numerically very small number of people elsewhere?
Well, yeah, well, I will comment on those two issues. I mean, I think the second one is an interesting point. And I don't think that any of these things are potentially a problem as far as the EU is concerned. I mean, money is the least of the issues in Cyprus. Money, if there was a solution, money will be found. There's no doubt about that because of the impact on the economy of the region more generally. You know, money will not be an issue. As far as the settlers are concerned, I think the answer to that is the same as the issue about what you say about property and compensation. It comes down to what individual people want. And a lot of people want their right to be recognised. And let me tell you this in a completely different context, something else I'm working on, which is called Holocaust restitution. During the Nazi occupation of Europe, a lot of people had their artwork stolen by the Nazis and they ended up in public collections all over the place, including in the UK. And over the last 15 years in particular, particularly the last 10 years, there's been a real move by people, and it's also happened with the end of the Iron Curtain, for people to try and reclaim their property. And having talked to people who are involved in this, what they want is the right to decide whether they have compensation or whether they have their artwork back. Now, I suspect that most of the people involved, and we're not talking about huge numbers here, don't particularly want the artwork back, but they want the right to say, I've got the right, whether I have the artwork back. I suspect most of them would be quite happy to leave it in the museum concerned, because frankly probably couldn't afford to insure it anyway. But they want the right to decide whether they have compensation or whether they have the artwork back. At the moment, they only have the right to compensation. They have no right to restitution. And I think that's may well be what happens in Cyprus. I think a lot of Greek Cypriot people who are refugees from the north have built another life in the south. They've built nice houses. They've built a new life. But their land is in the north. And I think that they want the right to decide how that land should be disposed of. Whether they exercise that right in one way or another is another matter altogether. But it's a question of it's a question of rights. And as far as the settler issue is concerned, again, I think if the settlers were coming out, or the Turkish Cypriots or the Turks were coming out and saying, we want the right to move the settlers to, France or Germany or the UK or whatever, then as the EU we'd have to seriously consider that. But nobody's asked for that. And I don't think you can simply go out and offer something like that. I think you have to wait for it to come as part of the process. Like at the moment, I mentioned the sovereign base area land, that is not on the table. It was on the table as part of the Annan plan. It is not on the table now. But if the parties reach a property settlement, a land settlement, and say, by the way, it would really help if you could give us this SBA land, the British government, I suspect, would consider it very favourably. But it's not an offer at the moment.
The report today's report says it may.
Sorry, as a supplementary, if I may, a supplementary on the compensation on properties. You mentioned as part of your speech that the Orams case and other cases outstanding in the European Court of Human Rights would certainly bankrupt the Turkish Cypriot economy and possibly even the Turkish economy. So some deadlock breaking device which could be the EU could be something which the Friends of Cyprus could initiate from outside Cyprus is just a thought for the friend. And sorry, as a second thought on the other issue of settlers, again, the parties may not have requested it, but in that numerically the numbers involved are so small, as part of the European Union parliamentary elections coming up, that is certainly an issue which could be raised by parties from outside Cyprus for other people to consider.
Well, 2 points there. And I think the most important point is this. This solution is going to come from within Cyprus, not from outside. That's where everything's gone wrong, every previous attempt. And if people start putting forward these ideas from within Cyprus, so be it. But I think that any politician from the outside world, of whatever rank, that goes around starting to do big boots and saying, well, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other, is creating a recipe for disaster. Because one side or the other will think they're playing games, they'll be accused of being pro-Greek or pro-Turk, and the other side will reject it. This has to come. Yeah. This has to come if it's an idea, and it's an interesting idea. It has to come from within the negotiations as part of that process. It can't come from outside. And our role as Friends of Cyprus isn't to come forward with big ideas, and we just get in the way. What I try and do is, what I've done today is to give you a fair analysis as to how I see it, to inform debate and discussion. And people can agree with me or disagree with me. That's your right. I've just given you my view.
Can you just clarify what the Friends of Cyprus role is then?
Well, I think we're sort of a study group, really.
Shall I jump in quickly?
Just
just a minute.
My question is... I have to go, sorry.
Yeah, well, you get your question.
My question is...
Just a minute.
I don't want to be...
Just a minute. Just a minute. No, our role, we are a group of MPs and peers from across the parties who have an interest in Cyprus, who come together, discuss it, listen to guest speakers from when they're visiting from the island, meet the Foreign Office, meet the ambassadors and high commissioners, listen to what's going on, raise issues that we think will help in Parliament by putting pressure on our own government where it's necessary, and express our views as part of the ongoing process. We produce a magazine, the Friends of Cyprus report, on developments as we see things going, but we are not some sort of great big power brokers.
Yeah.
That's not our role.
Yes. Please,
I suppose in the way of sort of an academic think tank.
your last before we go. Yes?
Thank you very much, sir. My question is, sir, I already spoke to some Greek Cypriot people. They're also not happy with the English soldiers which are based in Cyprus.
Yes.
The basis, you mean?
In
Or
Cyprus.
the
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I agree.
So what do you think about that, sir?
I agree. Well, I mean, a lot of the SBA people have misbehaved, and they're confined to barracks. It's wrong.
Thank you very
But
much.
as far as I can understand why. If I had a bar in Anglia Napa and a load of soldiers came and trashed it, I wouldn't be very happy about it.
Somebody's in
Thank you
prison.
very much, sir. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my question about it's going to be about your speech. Actually, in your speech, you speak about the human rights, and then you jump to something else that you said. There are like actually the number of mosques in the north side is increasing. So, do you think like it's a little bit?
No. The point I was making about the mosques is not to do with religious toleration or freedom. That's not the issue. The point I was making about the mosques is in the context of facts on the ground changing, and I use that in two ways. One, the fact that mosques have been built on Greek Cypriot land, which makes it harder. Let me finish the point. Let me just finish the point. Greek Cypriot, land owned by Greek Cypriots that has been expropriated. And the other issue I raise in that context is to show that the number of settlers is increasing, because the mosques are primarily to serve the settled communities, not the indigenous Turkish Cypriot communities. So it is a negative indication in two ways. I mean, I firmly accept people have got the right to religious freedom. That's not an issue at all.
Yeah.
The issue is building on Greek Cypriot owned land, which makes it that much harder to get the property solution at the other end. This was one of the fallout issues from the Annan plan.
Do you see as a policy of?
Well, yeah, this is one of the fallouts of the Annan plan. If you recall, what the Annan plan said was that land that had been developed would be dealt with by compensation. In round terms, I mean, I'm simplifying it. Land that was undeveloped would be returned to the Greek Cypriot owner. So when the Annan plan failed, everybody thought, oh well, any future solution would probably be on the same lines. So it created a perverse incentive to build on Greek Cypriot land, which had previously been undeveloped. And that was one of the byproducts of the failure of the Annan plan. And this is just another symptom of the same thing, as far as the mosque building is concerned. I mean, the number of mosques being built is nothing compared to the number of blocks of flats. And that's,
And then
that's
about the number of, you say something related to the number of Turkish troops in northern Cyprus. Do you see that as the only problem of dividing two countries? I mean, two sides. Like, if Turkey would pull their troops from northern Cyprus, would that sort everything out?
No,
Then
but it would be a contribution to decent tension. I mean, in the end, I think that most people would like to see a demilitarised island. I think that ultimately would. Let me just finish the point. Come back. I think ultimately that would be the best solution all round. But the point I make about Turkish troop numbers is if you've got an armed camp of 30,000 people on one side with tanks and guns and all the rest of it, and another army on the other side, it's inherently unstable. And anybody of any outside observer will tell you that. And having gone through the middle of Nicosia Green Line myself on a couple of occasions, I can see why it's unstable. You've potentially got people about as far away from you as you are with guns.
Yeah,
That's unstable, isn't it? I mean, people start shouting rude things and making gestures. It's not before long. Sooner or later, somebody gets triggered up, he shoots them on the other side, and you've got full-scale warnings.
But if you go
So-
in 1974, Turkish troops didn't go there for nothing.
Well, no, hang on, let me finish the point. So it is an inherently unstable position to have huge armies on both sides of the Green Line. So what can you do? You can have confidence-building measures by reducing troop numbers. You don't need 30,000 troops to defend northern Cyprus against any possible threat from either Greece or the Greek Cypriots. You don't need that number. In fact, the Turks accept that because the real number is actually 20,000. UNFIS have got very good intelligence about what's going on. So the Turkish Cypriot Turks could say, okay, we're going to reduce our troop numbers by a third, not actually take a single soldier away. But that actually creates a confidence building climate that they've reduced their troop numbers, the official numbers. And that then starts to create a climate where you can start to actually really reduce troop numbers because the Greek Cypriots can reciprocate by, for example, shortening their national service period, which is phenomenally long. It's one of the longest in the world. It's 2 years. You know, 2 years of a young man's life when he's told the enemy's over there is not exactly conducive to settlement, is it? More than 2 years. You know, if you can reduce your national service period, that's a confidence building measure and makes Greek Cypriot men that much better inclined towards a solution. And then you can have a process like that. Yeah, that's the simple. That's the only point I make on that.
Thank you. Well, we wouldn't go into the dialogue really. After just to remind you, for those who know, to remind you, those who don't know, perhaps you listen to that, on the 25th, I am informed from Zenon, on the 25th of February, the Minister for Europe, Caroline Flint, will give the Kit Kyle lecture. I don't know where it will be.
It'll
not here,
be
because it will be opposite.
Advance notice. It's going
That's
to take
very
place
good.
in the Wolfson Theatre, which is over in the new academic building here, and it'll be on the 25th of February. Yeah.
And thank you everyone for being here today, in spite of the awful weather. Yes? Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.